In the last worksheet, we looked at naming ionic compounds. These were compounds that had recognizable positive and negative ions in them. For elemental ionic compounds, if we saw a metal and a nonmetal in combination, we knew that was an ionic compound. And if the ionic compound involved polyatomic ions, we'd see recognizable ions from our polyatomic ion list in the compound. Now, covalent compounds are not ionic compounds. They don't contain any recognizable ions. And we can detect them because they are made of nonmetals. They don't have any metals in them. And we name them differently. They're not named the same way that ionic compounds are. Now, the names are kind of similar, but not quite the same. The name for a compound like CO2, now that's a covalent compound. All you've got is nonmetals. The name for a compound like that looks like this. You probably already know. Let's look at that name for a minute. What you do is name the first element, then you name the second element here, and you put an IDE ending on it. So that oxide is the oxygen in there. And now here's something new. This is something that we don't tend to do with ionic compounds. We use prefixes. To show how many atoms we have. Now, the prefixes are the big thing that's different between covalent compound names and ionic compound names. You don't have to say how many things you've got in an ionic compound. You do in a covalent compound, and you tell someone how many atoms you've got by using these prefixes. If we have CO, which is much different from CO2, how are we going to name that? Carbon is the name of the first element, and the name of the second element with an IDE is oxide, and we have to say how many we've got, and we can use a mon or a mono prefix on that to say that we have one. So there's the prefix that you use. So this is carbon monoxide, which you know probably already. It's a very poisonous compound, and it's very different from carbon dioxide. It makes a big difference in the properties of these compounds, how many oxygen atoms you've got. So we want to make sure that we have different names for those two things, because we're not talking about the same thing at all. All right, so what are the prefixes? They're the same prefixes that you learned in grade school to name polygons. Like, you might know two sets of prefixes. You know one that has things like quint for 5. But you don't call a 5-sided polygon a quintagon. You call it a pentagon. It's the same set of prefixes that you use in polygon naming that we're going to use here. So we're going to use mon or mono for 1, di for 2, tri for 3, tetra for 4, penta for 5, hexa for 6. Do you know 7? That'll be hepta. 8 is what? Think of the shape of a stop sign. That's an octagon. And if you've got a 9-sided polygon, you call that a nonagon. And 10 is deca. I need you to know these. So I'm going to put a box around them. There are a couple of other ones that you may encounter in real life, but you don't have to know them. For example, you want to keep going. 11 is undeca, and 12 is dodeca. But that's enough. If we can do the first 10, I'm going to be happy. All right, let's practice naming some covalent compounds. And we'll use these prefixes. Suppose I have this compound which is produced as a component of smog out of the tailpipes of cars. This is called, okay, we see a nitrogen and an oxygen in there, so it's going to be some nitrogen oxide, and now let's put the prefixes on. There's 2 nitrogens, so I'm going to say dinitrogen, and there's 5 oxygens, so I'm going to say pent. Now you can say pentoxide, or you can say pentaoxide. The same ruling body that set up the rules for the SI system says that this is the way you should do it. But people very often will type it this way, and you'll find that the worksheet and the homework will accept either of these. This is the way people do it in real life a lot. But you can say pentaoxide, and that's just fine. How about this one? Okay, that I there, that's an I, is iodine, and then the second element is fluorine, so that would be fluoride. Now we want to look at the prefixes we need. Now, I might think I need a mono on the I, because there's one, but you never start a name with mono. So even though I really should be saying monoiodine because there's one iodine, I'm going to leave off the mono in the beginning always. And now the second prefix that I need to add is for the 7. That'll be heptafluoride. All right. Let's see. How about this one? Okay, we've got boron there. And we've got oxygen, so I'm going to say oxide. And now let's add the prefixes in. There's 2 of these, so that would be di, boron. There's 3 of these, so that will be tri, oxide. Okay, get it? In the next video, we're going to name acids.